Justin Cook and Jesse Kaiser here today from 360 Yield Center to talk about Bandit, our product that we brought to market to address the need to apply nitrogen on the planter pass. We have two mantras that we're living by on this product that have driven our design. The first one that Jesse's going to be talking about later on will be do no harm. And then the second one that I'm going to talk about briefly is never a bad day. When a seedling begins to grow, there's two things that we're concerned about. One is that as the roots migrate outward, that they don't hit concentration bands that are too strong so that it inhibits root growth. So what we do is we put the nitrogen shallow, a fraction of an inch below the surface and several inches away from the seeding trench. And then we wait for a rain event in those few weeks of growth to take the nitrogen band down in a diluted form so that the roots never experience too much concentration of nitrogen. Secondly, we're interested in always having sufficient nitrogen as the plant is growing. The plant's making lifelong decisions in that V3 to V7 stage range of plant growth. It's deciding how many kernels around on the girth. It's deciding how many kernels long on the length. And so we don't want it to have any nitrogen stress during that time. And we know that as we go through the thermal cycles of warming and cooling, that we get immobilization events that last several days long. And if a plant is stressed when it's making those critical lifelong decisions, it will pull back on girth or length. So we want to make sure that there's a band of nitrogen that the roots are growing into that always provided sufficient nitrogen and fertility so that when it's making those lifelong decisions, it always has an unstressed and happy day to make those decisions. So Jesse, for the first thing on doing no harm, we've incorporated spring-loaded arms into Bandit. Explain why we want to do that, the spring-loaded arms.
The purpose of the spring-loaded arms are so we do not steal downforce and affect our planting depth. The fact that they're spring-loaded means that if we hit a rock or other residue or anything else in the field, the arms give up and go out of the way and planting depth is not affected.
So Jesse, explain to me, we put adjustable springs where you can put this in several different locations to get different amounts of spring force on your coulters. What's the purpose of that?
Yes, so that's for varying soil conditions, whether it's residue, whether it's amount of moisture, or just sandy versus clay soil types. Also, what we've done is that allows us to lock the arms up, so if you switch to soybean planting after you're done with corn planting and don't want to apply nitrogen, you can pivot the arm up and put a pin through and your discs are up and out of the way.
Okay, another question for you. The dimensions, these are 6 inches wide and the dimensions. Talk a little bit about the positioning of the discs, of how that affects the nitrogen band.
The purpose of the discs is to create a small groove or furrow that ultimately the nitrogen is placed into. So we've designed it with a bit of a toe, which means that it's tipped inward in order to push the dirt to the side and then create that groove. At the same time, we've created some camber, which means it's tilted inward. That way it doesn't throw the dirt far, but rather rolls it up and out of the way.
Talk to me a little bit about the Foreaft and the positioning of the coulters and the extension of the row unit.
When we've designed it, we've tucked it as far up into the opening disc as we can. The purpose being that as you go around a tight radius curve, whether it's a terrace or a corner, we don't see the nitrogen discs cross over and get close to the seed furrow. Also, this makes our transport width only 5 inches wider than what it would be without the Bandit unit.
So that's great. Now tell me a little bit about the plumbing, how you get from a single hose down into the ground in a way that it does no harm both to the system and to the ground and to the trench.
So we start with a single push-to-connect fitting at the top. It gets split in a Y-splitter, and then we have an orifice on each hose that gets the proper flow to each side of your row. Then we go down and we have what we call the hose guide. Basically, the hose guide lives in the small furrow created by the disc and applies the nitrogen to the bottom of that furrow. At the same time, it's flexible so that if we do hit a residue or a rock situation, it can flex up and away rather than drag and create a muddy environment.
So the chain system, that's been a really novel idea on how you've designed the chain system for all the different applications of rubber closing systems or spike closing systems. Tell us a little bit about the innovation around the chain system.
Sure. So traditionally how we mount the chains is we use two brackets that are mounted at the closing wheel hubs, and the chain just hangs behind in order to drag a little dirt back into the seed and nitrogen furrows. The problem becomes when we have a spiked wheel is that the chain wants to flip up and around and catch in the spikes, causing jamming. So what we did to get around that was we designed extra extension brackets that keep the chain at a prescribed distance away from the spike wheel. At the same time, it still lets it have the flexibility to drag dirt behind and fill in those incontinuities in the seed trench.
So just to conclude, when we set out to design Bandit, we wanted to build a better on-planter nitrogen system, and our two things that we were concerned about were do no harm and never a bad day. I think Jesse's explained that on the do no harm, we've spring-loaded the system, we've kept it tight in a way we're not stealing downforce when we shouldn't. We're putting the nitrogen where it belongs, even on the straightaways as well as the curves, and we've got a chain system that won't get caught up in your spike system. So as far as never a bad day, first of all, we're putting the nitrogen several inches away from the seed, and we're using that 3 to 5 week time period where the plant doesn't need anything, it's still living off the starch, where a rain event takes the nitrogen, and we're keeping the nitrogen at a dilution level where it doesn't harm roots, and we're keeping it at a concentration level where there's always adequate nitrogen for that young plant who's making lifelong decisions. So those are some of the strengths that we incorporated into our new 2019 design. But the truth of the matter is we had a lot of these systems running in 2018. They did a good job of depositing nitrogen where they needed it. And here's some thoughts from those growers who used the system in the past year.
I'm Mark Miller, and I've been really happy this year with the use of the 360 Bandit. As I add these products from 360, I like the idea of having everything right there so that the seed, doesn't have to reach very far to start grabbing its nutrients, and we can just keep feeding that seed, cutting back on what we're using because we're not losing it. It's not just laying too far away for it to get. So it's just been overall a great experience, and one that I'm willing to keep adapting to all the time.
Hi, my name's Tony Millard. I'm from Elma, Iowa, northeastern Iowa. My favorite feature of the 360 Bandit, I guess, was the fertilizer placement. That's my main goal with the product, was to try and find something that would put that fertilizer right where the seed was going to utilize it, and 360 Bandit worked flawlessly in those conditions. One of the features that we liked when we were weighing our options was that it was separate from the gauge wheels or the depth placement of the seed. That way, we have some fields that tend to have some rockier soil, and we don't want to, if it's tied into the gauge wheel or the depth system, to have a system that's going to affect our seed placement or seed depth. So we're very happy on the lack of disturbance that it caused for seed placement and seed depth. So the Bandit allowed us to put nitrogen with that seed and allow us to get the corn up high enough where we could get in and side dress in a timely manner, and the crop never wanted for anything. It was always had that nitrogen there, so it was, very, very handy.